when it is due. So please pass it forward if you haven't given it to me yet. Oh, excuse me. Oh, well, I'll have to read the directions. I think I said stapled, but, you know, it's not the end of the world. It's only anybody else? Going once? Going twice? Sold. Don't worry, this was only 8% of your overall course grade. I was being sarcastic when I said that. All right, I will do my very best to get this graded and back to you by the end of the week so you can do better on the next one. Speaking of the next one, let's look at your Flight 102 syllabus. Wow, the draft of the next one is due on September 12th. So if today is the 5th, that's a week from today. So I'm officially reminding you that the draft essay, the essay page, remember it's that one page where you fill it out, 5 different things, and where you got the data? And that one is on the event. That is on your aviation event or your space event. Does anybody have any questions on what's due a week from today on the 12th of September? Jordan, have you picked an event yet? Okay, well, you cannot do one that anybody else has done, so you will want to see me to talk about which event you can and cannot do. Jaron. I am going to do grade. The question is, how do I do grades? And I'm going to try to do it this semester through Canvas, which is Reedley College, since they make me turn in grades at the end of the semester. But I've just got everybody into the class the middle of last week, or I didn't do it. Valley ROP did. So I haven't set the course up. So I will work hard, but no promises, to try to get all the grades into Canvas. But effectively what that means for everybody is that for you to access your grades, you're going to have to log into your Reedley College system. So you will want to find that email they sent you and follow the directions on logging into your Reedley College email system. Yes, you will be able to, at the end of the semester, print out the final grade for each Reedley College course and show them to whomever you wish. But I have set the class up effectively that your high school grade and your college grade will be identical. So, and I report grades through Valley ROP, which goes to the high school. But if you want to print it out and show somebody, you're welcome to do that. I think what you're looking for is the grades on the quizzes and this essay. Huh? Oh, no. The grades for this course are going into the Reedley College system. The only way the high schools will know what grades you're getting is when they ask me. Like, for instance, anybody here from Parlier? Parlier, they ask grades of like 4 or 5 times across the semester. So I think it's like September 22nd I have to give them grades on up-to-date grades. But I don't send them every single grade. Like, what did you get on quiz 1, quiz 2, quiz 3? Just your overall grade at that moment. On the Reedley College website, when I get it up and running, which I'm going to see how far I can get this week, you can actually look and see what did you get on every single quiz and what you got on every single essay. Am I answering everybody's question? Okay. All right. The last time we were here, we just had talked about anti-aircraft artillery and had started barrage balloons. Remember, barrage balloons were those unmanned balloons that would go up in the sky and take nets with them and hold nets and wires up, and you would put them near a target, a place you did not want the enemy to fly aircraft. So it made it harder for enemy aircraft to strafe or bomb, or at least not very close. What if you were at 20,000 feet? I think you could still drop bombs. So barrage balloons only deterred aircraft that were at low altitude. Dogfighting. You can read books and books and books about fighter planes fighting other fighter planes during World War I. That's really where dogfighting, and I've never looked it up to see where the word dogfighting came from. What? They're chasing each other. They look like dogs? they look like airplanes to me. So you know, it looks like an airplane fight. I'm sure it doesn't surprise me that that's what somebody thinks. And when I say dogfighting tactics, I'm talking about like I said earlier, if you go to YouTube and type in BBC, that's the British Broadcast Corporation, type in BBC History of Aviation, there's 26 different videos. One of them is 52 minutes on World War I, and they talk a whole lot about the flying that occurred and the changes, the improvements that occurred during World War I. And there are several people during World War I that figured out a whole lot of things on how to best fight other airplanes in the sky. Of course, my personal favorite is strategic bombing. Strategic bombing is where you fly over the enemy's land and try to blow up their factories and try to blow up their railroad yards so that they can't make things to fight. You know, you would blow up a gun factory or blow up an airplane factory or blow up a train factory or blow up a ship factory or blow up a port with a bunch of ships in it. You're trying to prevent them from making more weapons. That's strategic bombing. That got invented in World War I. Flying boats. When I say flying boats, that's different than a float plane. A float plane is typically just a regular plane and they put floats on it. A flying boat is the fuselage of the airplane, is designed to land in the water. And you can make them bigger and you can make them handle much, much bigger waves so you can land them in the ocean. Has anybody ever been on a flying boat? A float plane? I've been on a float plane once in Alaska. It was fun. My brother lives in Alaska. So we're going to watch a few-minute video on why and how did the United States enter World War I. So this is one of those BBC Century of Flight. Here we go.
One of the greatest attractions of any air show today is the sight of replica fighters of the Great War of 1914-18 being put through their paces.
So there's a Fokker triplane. These are all airplanes from World War I.
For if aerial combat has ever had any romance,
So
it was in the skies over France and Flanders 80 years ago.
Above the propeller. That's before synchronized machine guns got invented. That airplane would have obviously been early.
Aircraft like these were the equivalent of today's American F-16 Fighting Falcon and Russian MiG-29 Fulcrum.
Wings were very short, so it could turn very rapidly. It was very important. But even the Red Baron was killed.
The only differences are that during 1914-18, aircraft fought each other at a fraction of the speeds of today's fighters, and the human eye was the only way of spotting a hostile aircraft and engaging it.
You ever play chicken with another car and both go 50 miles an hour? Yeah, I would play chicken.
The maneuvers used by the Great War fighter pilots were much the same as today, and as now, the pilot with the sharper reflexes usually won.
Oh, well. Yeah, I was hoping for a movie on how come the United States Yes. Yes. Flyboys? No, but
An actual review
of
Funner, California.
That's the story of the Tuskegee Airmen, yes? Yeah, they did an old movie with Lawrence Fishburne. You know, the guy from Matrix with the sunglasses? Yeah, they actually did that movie, I don't know, like 20 years ago when Lawrence Fishburne wasn't old now and gray like me. Hey, the Matrix is like 15 years old, man. It's an old movie. In any case,
Revealed in a
no, I
telenovela.
haven't seen the latest version. No, that's not the one I wanted either. I saw it, but it's been so long ago, it's ridiculous. got to figure out what to do about the sounds. I know you can't hear this very well.
So America watches World War I from 1914 to April of 1917. And people ask why. Why doesn't America get involved immediately? And American politicians are petrified of being drawn into a foreign war and fighting for foreign ends.
Remember, the United States is a nation of immigrants. People came here to avoid war in Europe.
The Americans had from the very beginning an official policy of neutrality, but neutrality never meant indifference or apathy.
Even though we're saying we don't want to involve ourselves, we certainly were sympathetic in trying to help and aid that cause in ways that the Germans saw as being destructive to their war aims. So in all those ways, the Wilson administration is walking a tightrope.
Woodrow Wilson, after all, runs for re-election in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." And yet, within a year after winning that election, that very same president is declaring war on the Germans.
Ultimately, the triggering event that brings us into the war is Germany's decision to revive unrestricted submarine warfare.
Added to that, the Germans had managed in a particularly ham-fisted way to try and recruit the Mexicans to come in on their side if America entered the war. And they had offered to return to the Mexicans all the lands they had lost in the 19th century to the U.S. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. The Germans sent this offer to the Mexicans by telegram. Western Union, of all things. Only what they didn't realize was the Western Union office was in London. And so the British captured the telegram and promptly sent it to the U.S. and released it in public. And that angered the American people so much that, combined with unrestricted submarine warfare, Wilson felt that he had to take the U.S. into the war against Germany and Austro-Hungary.
The telegraph that the British owned. Because we were selling arms to Great Britain.
When America entered the conflict, it changed the war. Although not as much as everybody expected, because just as America was entering the war, Russia was dropping out.
Now, it's a race. As Russia is leaving the war, can the United States get enough troops in to tilt that scale in favor of the Allies?
They brought in the men, the materiel, and the resources that these Allies needed desperately.
The French and the British were suffering a sense that the war was stalemated, that defeat might be coming, and the American commitment was a real shot in the arm for both political leaders and for ordinary soldiers in the trenches.
Prior to the outbreak of World War I, America was recognized as a strong young nation. By joining with the Allies and really helping to bring about the end of the war,
and then it upset them that the people that the Germans invited Mexico to invade the United States. All right. Okay, we got 24 minutes left. So, 04 World War I, this is effectively part 2, but it's really just World War I. It's just going to take 2 days to do it. So, you can add to that list. The last list we had, we were looking at all the advancements that occurred in aviation in World War I. You can just add these 3 more things to it. So how many things are on that list now if we add these 3? Are there 27 different things, or are there only 17? Nobody has them all right there in front of them, and you could count them? Okay, well, let's just say there's how many? There's 30? 70. 7 plus these 3? Okay, so there's only 10. So the test question would be, name 11 of the 10 in aviation that occurred during World War I. So if there were submarines, finally somebody decided to start attacking submarines with airplanes. That happened a lot more during World War II. One of the things that happened in World War I think it's kind of out of order. In World War I, aviation was advancing like crazy. They'd start building an airplane, and somebody'd figure out something really awesome, so they'd build a better airplane, and then they'd build a bunch of those for 6 months or a year, and they'd go, oh, wait, we found something even more. So you started out in World War I not having a standardized fleet. If you look at what France flew in World War I, there was like 10 or 15 different airplanes that they flew that were all brand new during World War I. But it's because the aviation was advancing so much. I think what was really interesting is, does anybody remember what year did Henry Ford start Ford Motor Company in the United States? Does anybody remember? I'll give you a hint. It was the same year that the Wright brothers first flew their sustained-powered manned-controlled flight. Okay, I'm going to ask you on the final exam about when the Wright brothers flew. I bet you that's going to happen. It was 1903 when the Wright brothers flew their manned, sustained, controlled, and powered flight. That was the year that Henry Ford started the Ford Motor Corporation. And one of the reasons why Ford Motor Corporation did so well is because he exploited the use of assembly lines. He wasn't the one who invented it, but he did the better than everybody else did by a factor of 10. That is, they built an engine, and they built another one exactly like it, so they could push that engine to another building and bolt it into a car, and it fit. We're used to that now. We think, oh yeah, I go to auto parts store and I buy a headlight lens for my car to fit. And we don't think about the fact that when cars and airplanes first fit. So that means if you built an airplane, it wasn't exactly the same. The problem with this is that, one, the parts weren't interchangeable from one airplane to the other or from one car to the other, and it took a lot of time. It would be a lot better if I just sat here and said, I'm going to make this skid, and I'm going to make another skid, and another skid, and another skid, and I made them all identically. And then somebody else put them together. So that's what we're talking about in the form of an assembly line, is all the parts were the same, so they were interchangeable. So like I said before, I think I wish I put this slide first. At the beginning of the war, most one by one by hand, and it was slow. But during World War I, contracts with governments to these aircraft manufacturers said, we need 200 of them, or we need 300 of them, or we need 1,000 of them. And it's like, oh yeah, we could do this assembly line thing. So at first, you built 500 airplanes, and then pow, they said, oh, that one's not as good anymore. We want to build a different model. So at the beginning of World War I, lots of people built lots of different airplanes. But by the end of World War I, France, instead of having 10 or 15 different airplanes, only had 3 or 4. Does anybody remember World War I very well? Have you ever talked to anybody about World War I? That's an era of mine. My grandparents died in 1995, but they were born in 1902. So in 1917, at the beginning of World War I, they both turned 15 that year. And I never asked my grandparents about what their life was like during World War I. I talked to them a little bit about World War II, because in World War II, they were in their early 40s. But I've never talked to a human being who was alive during World War I. Has anybody done that? It'd be even harder for you all to do that. How about World War II? Have you ever talked to anybody about World War II, to someone who was alive in World War II? Grandparents? Yeah. How old were your grandparents, Alex, in World War II? Which one? Do you know? Was it your grandmother, grandfather? Do you remember where she was living? She was in Hawaii? That's an interesting place during World War II. Oh, no kidding. Holy crap, was she there for Pearl Harbor? Yeah. She had left Hawaii? So she was in Hawaii just before Pearl Harbor. Did she come back to the United States and go to, like, California or something? Was she in the service? She wasn't in the Army or anything? Okay. How about you, Johnny? Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Ouch. She survived. Good for her. Jaron, did you say you talked to somebody? Yeah? How do you know about how old he was during World War II? A kid, teenager, 3 years old? Oh, okay. Was he in the service, do you know? Okay, yeah. If you were 19 in the United States in the middle of the war, you pretty much did one of two things. You either worked in a factory building munitions or arms or airplanes, or you were active duty. Well, I take that back, because somebody had to grow food. So there's people farming there. All right, when I say Allied powers, I'm talking about the good guys. Remember, whoever wins the war, they say in the end that they are the good guys. Whoever loses the war, the history books get written saying that they were the bad guys. Just so to be clear. So when I say good and bad, it's all relative. So Allied is like the U.S., Britain, France. France had 51,000 airplanes built across the war. Now, granted, France was in the war the whole time, so that was 4 years, if the war lasted for 4 years. But hey, does anybody remember what is the advantage that France had? Well, they were on the Western Front. That's way better than being on the Eastern Front, because you're not going to get frostbite nearly so easily. Who had more airplanes at the beginning of World War I than anybody else? Yeah, France had more airplanes, and they had lots of people building new airplanes. So Great Britain built 55,000. Of course, what was an advantage to Great Britain during World War I? How much of the fighting in World War I occurred in Great Britain? Can you say zero? Yeah, none. No, that's not zero. None is similar to zero, but not exactly. Yeah, none of the fighting in World War I happened in Great Britain, so you could build a factory and nobody bombed it. Huh? It was mostly in France and what's now Germany. And between what's now Germany and Poland and Russia. But back then, I don't think it was Poland. I'm not... Oh. France was taken over by Germany completely. It was occupied. And they took over Belgium and Poland and Czechoslovakia and Holland and Norway. I don't think they did Sweden or Finland. Italy was on the Axis power, so Italy wasn't taken over by Germany, but they had a mutually assured we're the good guys and they're the bad guys treaty. I don't know how much fighting occurred in Turkey. I'm going to guess a small, I don't know. I would have to guess. There was some fighting in northern Africa, and then there was a boatload in the Pacific, but that's a whole other conversation. And I tried to find good numbers on Russia and Italy, and I could not find numbers on Russia and Italy as to how many airplanes they built had during the war. I did find a good number on the United States, 20,000. What I think is crazy about that 20,000 is that only 2,000 of them, or 10% of it, actually made it to Europe. Now you got to understand, if we don't go to war until 18 months before the war's over, and all of a sudden a month or two later you as a company get a contract to start building airplanes, you got to build them, you got to test fly them, you got to take them apart, and you got to put them on a ship, and they got to get there. So orders went out to build lots and lots of airplanes, but part of the reason that we didn't get them there is because the length of time it took to ramp up. Let's say that you have a car factory and you're making 1,000 cars a month, and all of a sudden you get a contract from the government to make 10,000 cars a month. How long does it take for you to go from building 1,000 a month to building 10,000 a month? 10 times. I mean, you don't even have to build a building that's 10 times bigger. You need to hire 10 times more employees, tools and stuff you got to build. So you can't just snap your finger and say, oh yeah, 2 months later, I'm going to put out 10 times more. So my guess is that it took companies 6 months or a year just to get up to building enough airplanes per month. At a contract, even if the war was over, you kept building the airplanes because you were going to get paid for them until somebody said stop. So interestingly enough, most of the pilots flying in Europe were flying in French airplanes because the United States bought airplanes from French manufacturers because they had already spent 2.5 years ramping up to build not 1,000 airplanes a month, but 10,000. Well, it wasn't really 10,000 airplanes a month. But. So if you were a U.S. pilot in the U.S. Army in World War I, you were more likely to have been flying in a French-built airplane than you were in a U.S.-built airplane. And quite frankly, you were flying in a better airplane. It probably went faster and could turn and be more maneuverable and probably had better machine guns on it. Because how many companies in the United States had previously built airplanes that had been in combat? None. All right, the Central Powers, that's the bad guys. Germany had built 35,000 airplanes, and I couldn't find any for Austria-Hungary. So based on the two previous sets of numbers, who had more airplanes, the good guys or the bad guys? Yeah, the good. I mean, the Allied powers. Yeah. But if you watch that BBC on YouTube, you're going to find out that the very first airplane to get synchronized machine guns was the Eindecker in Germany. And for about 6 months, that airplane could shoot down other airplanes 10 times easier than all the other ones. So for a while, that one airplane was worth 10 airplanes. So guess who lost more airplanes during that period? The good guys did, yeah, the Allied powers. Because that Eindecker, you could just point the airplane at the other airplane, pull the trigger. Oh, they're dead. Oh, and go get another one. You know, if that's what your plan was. All right. Looks like we're going to finish this by 3 o'clock today. So at the end of the war, does anybody remember the end of the war now? Since I gave you the wrong year at the beginning of the semester? When did the fighting stop? Not the treaty signed. The fighting stopped in December of 18. It's all right. It's all right. I've confused you. But then in early 19 was when all the treaties got signed. Like we're going to talk about the Treaty of Versailles here shortly, and that was in 1919. So shooting started in 14. Shooting ended in late 1918. So at the end of the war, the governments told their airplane manufacturers, stop! And countries had a whole lot of extra airplanes. And in fact, that is one of the reasons why, at least in the United States, why aviation grew a lot during the late teens, early 20s, is because a lot of these airplanes had been built for the United States war effort. And many of them never even went into service, got sold really, really cheap by the federal government to people living in the United States. I mean, what if you could pick up a little 2-seat airplane for $500? You know, cheaper than a car. This is a French word, Versailles. There's actually a castle at Versailles, and I can't remember hang out at that castle. But the Treaty of Versailles, if you remember, if you take aviation out of the equation for a minute, and you said, name the top 5 things about World War I. One of them is, you would say, at the end of the war, the Treaty of Versailles screwed over all of the Central Powers. And when I say screwed over, I mean that countries like Germany and Austria had to pay money to France and Great Britain and Russia, called War Reparations. That's when it says Germany War Reparations, that means the country of Germany had to pay money back. Not pay money back because they didn't borrow it, but they had to pay money to the winners. Because we won, ha ha ha, that means the war's your fault. That means you owe us money. That was the way the Treaty of Versailles went. The other thing it did, so that but now if you want to throw some aviation into it, you'd say that one of the other things, 2 things that came out of the Treaty of Versailles is it dramatically limited how much military Germany could have. And we're going to bring this back up when we start talking about the 1930s, a decade after this. So if this happened, if the shooting stopped in late 1918 and the Treaty of Versailles got signed in 1919, then think about the next 10 years. When did Germany invade Poland? Does anybody remember? I know that's not a prerequisite to this course, is European war history. What? Second World War, yeah. 39 is when Germany invaded Poland. So some people say that was the beginning of World War II, was when Germany invaded Poland. That's commonly what people say. Let's just say that for a minute. Okay, that's 10 years later. For this next 10 years, if you lived in Germany, you paid boatloads of taxes so the government could give the money away to these other countries that won the war. And you couldn't build up much of a military. And then this last one, you couldn't build powered airplanes. At the end of the Treaty of Versailles, the only thing you could do in Germany was fly balloons and gliders. So what happened in Germany? They flew gliders a lot. And in fact, if you look at the best gliders on the planet today, you know where they build them? Germany. Because they spent a decade going, fine, if we can't fly powered airplanes, we're going to get really, really, really good at flying gliders. Now, we can talk all day long about that 10 years. Was the Treaty of Versailles broken? Because before 1939, did they start building battleships and tanks and airplanes up the wazoo? Oh yeah, wazoo like crazy. Versailles? Yeah, they did. In fact, the economy of Germany got awesome. In fact, we could argue all day long about why Adolf Hitler did so well in Germany in the 1930s. He effectively told the public of Germany, we have been screwed as the German people, and therefore we're not going to do all that crap anymore, and we're going to be the greatest countries on the planet like we deserve. I'm quoting him, I'm paraphrasing. And lots and lots of people liked the things he said. So Germany actually violated the Treaty of Versailles like crazy in the 1930s. But everybody was looking around going, well, do we want to have a war with Germany? And everybody kept going, no. People die. It sucks. So nobody went to Germany and hit Germany up with a 2x4. Maybe they should have. I don't know. All right. So there's one last thing that I think is really, really interesting. And that is the Spanish flu. In fact, I'm not going to show you the video. I just want to tell you something about the Spanish flu. The reason they called it the Spanish flu is because they were trying to figure out where it originally from. And it's not, they never could figure out where it came from. But a lot of people who caught the flu in 1918 were in Spain, but that's not where it ended up. But that was because a lot of people were going in and out of Spain. One thought is the Spanish flu actually started getting big in an army camp in the United States. In any case, here's an interesting thought. More people died of the flu in Europe during World War I than died from getting killed by the enemy. I'm not making this number up. I'm going to say that again because it doesn't seem right, does it? It doesn't seem logical. Millions of people died from this flu. Well, the plague is a lot worse than the flu, but what happens when you get the flu? You get dehydrated because you get diarrhea, right? Okay, so if you have no medical treatment whatsoever and you don't have even a doctor to talk to, it's not like they can put an IV in you and pump you up full of water. You died of dehydration. Again, during the period of World War I, more humans died due to the Spanish flu than died because of the conflict of the war. Now, I'm also including all the civilians, okay? I'm not just saying military, but if you take all the people in all of the countries that were involved in the war, including the United States, and all the countries in Europe that were involved in the war, more died from the Spanish flu than died from being shot or blown up. This is weird. This is weird. If you're going to be a human being on this planet, there are weird things you need to understand. And when I found that out, and literally, I didn't find this out until a year ago when I first taught this class. And I went, what? More people died of the flu than died from getting shot with a bullet or landing on a grenade or getting gassed by chemical weapons? Yeah. Way more people. So tomorrow we're going to have a quiz on